Um, good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pei to K, Halacha Dalit. We're learning today Daf Nun. We're already up to Daf Nun. The Masechtas Kalayim, just to remember, has Pei Dalit Dafim. So we are getting somewhere. We are beginning today on Daf Mem Tes Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the new Mishnah. And indeed, the majority of today's Daf will be the Mishnah itself. Now, as an intro for the Mishnah, we learned on Daf Mem that there's a machlokes b'shamai b'silel as to what happens when someone plants the foreign seed within the Daled Amis outside the Kedem. We learned that we don't say the entire vineyard becomes kadosh, becomes asur bahana. We do not say that. What we say is that the minimum Kedem becomes prohibited lebeshamai 1 row. Obviously, if you planted the foreign seed so close to the vineyard that the seed itself is within daladamas of 2 rows, then they both become asur bahana. But we're speaking about a case where you planted it outside the vineyard. You didn't go beyond the avodah space. That seed is physically only within daladamas of 1 row, but it's not within daladamas of the next row. And Beis Shammai, indeed, only that 1 row becomes asur. And ironically, here, Beis Hillel will have a stringency from his leniency, since Beis Hillel, the minimum size of a kedem is 2 rows, so it's going to chap in the isur, the minimum, which is 2 rows, but not more than that. What we're going to be learning about in this Mishnah is a interesting rabbinic prohibition, which will make the area that a foreign seed that's planted in the vineyard, when you plant a foreign seed, it's going to grab le'isur, a much larger area. We don't go with the 1 row or the 2 rows lebeis Hillel. What we will say in our Mishnah is that it's going to chap 16 amas. Now, the reason why it grabs, and the 16 amas is a circular radius of 16 amas. A lot of today's daf will be technical. Again, big help if you have pictures, and if not, it's fine. The idea is right here. Why are we going to 16 amas? I'm going to share right now one of the reasons given by the Rishonim. When we learn it inside, I'll share another reason, and there are many other reasons. So let's go according to the Rash, and also brought down by the Rash. The idea that since we learned also in the previous chapter that by a kerem gadol, which is defined by you having 3 rows of 3 vines or more, we allow for the distance between 1 row and the other to be right under 16 amas. Only if it's 16 amas apart or more do we say the rows are not connected and you don't have a kerem. So we have the shear within a kerem of 1 row being connected to the other if it's a little bit less than 16 amas. That is one opinion of where do we get the 16 amas circular radius, that if you planted it within the kerem, when you were not allowed to do it, we don't say it's going to chap daled amas. We don't say it's going to grab the minimum kerem. We're going to say all of the vines that are within the radius of 1/6 of 16 amas become asur, because of this explanation that we just gave. And again, we'll learn another one when we learn it inside. Here we have a great picture that we can already leave the picture up on, whoever has the Zoom over here. And just to make it clear that all of this is only midrabanan. And the reason why are the Rabbanan more machmir if a foreign seed is planted inside versus if it was planted outside the kedem is from Marasayin. That means if a person plants something that he should not have planted within the avodah, within daladamis, I know that it's not okay. But at the end of the day, when a person looks at it, what does he see? He sees here is a vineyard, and outside the vineyard, you planted something that you shouldn't have. And maybe if you planted it by the boundary of daladamis, you don't even see that it's within the isur. It can even look like you're in the heter. In other words, once it's physically outside the vineyard, the appearance of there being a mixture makes sense, is less. When you plant a foreign seed in a vineyard, you mamish, aside of the halacha, which is the iked, but even a marasayin, it's mixed. So that's one of the reasons why the Chachamim were more machmir. Now, how far
And Rabbi,
apart,
just to be clear, you can't remedy this by just pulling out the foreign whatever was planted there. You have to clear out
very
everything.
good. It's exactly what the Gabbai is saying. That it chaps the radius of 16 amos, which means not only do you have to pull out the foreign seed, but now let me add something important. And I know that we said it a few times, and we're going to learn it inside together. We didn't learn it inside yet. That if in this case, first you planted a vineyard and the vines already grew out, then you planted a foreign seed, which you were not allowed to do. If the vines did not grow an amount which is 1/200th more of where it was, while it was within this proximity of the foreign seed, then when you pull the foreign seed out, there's a much lesser of a problem here, and more details we'll learn later. Let's always remember that when it comes to the issur of being Makayim, Kilei Akerem, you're not allowed to plant it. And now that you found it, you have to pull it out immediately. But if you didn't, to say that post facto everything is prohibited, you have to know exactly. There's more shiurim that we'll get to later. Now, how close did you plant the vines from each other? And how close did you plant the rows from each other? And in our Mishnah, and indeed the Metzias, there is a consistency, meaning people who decide to plant a vineyard using the minimum amount of space needed between the rows. We already learned this. The minimum amount of space needed in between the rows is Daled Amos. People that plant rows that are 4 amos apart will normally plant each vine within the row also 4 amos apart. If you're going to make it 5 amos apart, you'll plant the vine 5 amos apart. 6. And we spoke about this before. It doesn't have to be that way. The rules of the Mishnah could be maneuvered to make it fit any Metzias. The rule is what we said, that midrabanan, if an isur was done, either planting or if the wind blew a seed in. But you who discovered it, who has now the obligation to uproot it, you are makayim it. You're not allowed to do that. So what will be the isur? 16 amma radius. And the Mishnah gives actual how many vines will be chapped. Why does the Mishnah have to give a number of how many vines? Just say anything that's within 16 ammas. And every vineyard is different. Every vineyard is configured different, even though the standard obviously was 4 between the vines and 4 between the rows. Because we'll see that in a certain scenario, the Chachamim were more machmir, and they're going to ask in more vines, as we'll speak out when we learn the Mishnah. This is more or less going to be the entire Mishnah, and we'll begin today learning the Gemara on Daf Nun Amud Beis. And what we will have in the Gemara is a clarification that when our Mishnah is speaking about the 4 amos, the Metzias of the Mishnah, it must be speaking about a scenario that excludes the trunks of the vines themselves. We already spoke about this above also when we were learning about whether it's Kedem Katan under 8 amos, the Kedem Gadol to combine the rows to become a Kedem. It has to be under 16 amos. It's all excluding the vines themselves. And it's going to be a technical geschmack with pictures. Maybe we'll have the merit today of having Kevin drawing also his own pictures. I think we should make a safer Kevam. And we'll have it Lezecher and Chabad Sola. Good memories. Very geschmack. So here we go, guys. So let's go. The Mishnah begins. If you planted a vegetable, and for the record, it doesn't have to be a vegetable. I know that what the Mishnah is not talking about are trees. Don't forget, Chevra. Trees in a vineyard is mutter even midrabanan. There is absolutely no issur. As we spoke about Ikilei Zeroim also. But the issue by trees is only grafting, but not for right now. So, Yarak is Yarak, or it's vegetables, legumes, grains. But that's what the Mishnah means. So if someone planted that inside a vineyard, now can you plant something in the vineyard? Well, actually, yeah. If you have a karachas akerem and you have the 16 amas, you could. But in other words, when you were not allowed to do it. Or if you were mekayim it, that's the key. Mekayim means even though no one did an issur, it happened naturally. Vegetables sprouted on their own. Nevertheless, you are chayv to uproot it immediately. And I just want to say that when I told the Gabbai about the 1/200, it doesn't mean that you get to wait until the time that it takes for it to become asur bahana. You are obligated to uproot it immediately. We're going to learn more dinim about it. There are exceptions. right? If you're going in the same direction and you see it and you're going to be getting there, you don't have to skip out of your order. But generally, when you discover that there is kilei zerayim, or for sure kilei kalayim, you have to uproot it. And if you didn't, and now you have an isur, so the Mishnah gives you a number. Instead of giving the rule, which we'll give in a moment, of 16 amma radius, there's a reason for this. Says the Mishnah, you will end up having 45 vines that will be indeed within the 16 ammas radius, circular radius from all the sides, that will become usr. Now, when we spoke in the intro, we spoke about the Kedem Gadol shear of 16 ammas. I want to speak just one other reason why we have the 16 amma rabbinic chumra dika radius. Why is it that much? So there's another interesting phenomenon, which is that a tree is nourished by their roots that are within 16 ammas from its trunk. Even though you have trees whose roots grow, people have no idea how gavaldic roots could be. Not by all trees, but by many trees. But even if the roots grew a mile, it gets its nourishment from the roots wherever they are that are within 16 ammas. Now the roots can go to any direction from the tree trunk. Now think about that. That means that if you plant a vegetable, the vegetable that you planted is drawing nourishment from the ground, and all of the vines that are within 16 ammas are drawing nourishment from the same ground. All of this is a rabbinic problem, because we already mentioned many times that when it comes even to kilei kalayim, it's not that much about drawing nourishment. We just learned yesterday that anything that's under 3 ammas under the ground, or 2 shiurim ago, is not a problem. So I just want to make that clear. But there is an inyan midrabanan, it's drawing nourishment. You shouldn't have planted it. You should not have been mekayim it. We're going to have the isur go in a 16 amma radius. Now, take a look at the picture, and you'll see right away something interesting. The Mishnah should write 16 amma radius. And you'll see right away that why the Mishnah does not do it. But first of all, when you speak about someone planting a vegetable within a kedem, there are two ways that it could have happened. You have whoever's looking, diagram A versus diagram B. In diagram A, I know you can't plant a vegetable on the spot where you have the trunk of the vine. You can't put two things physically in the same place. I get that. But you can plant vegetables right around the trunk of the vine, which will be the case. And I'm saying dafke all the way around it, and not only on one side. We'll get there when we get to the Gemara. This is just technical details. In other words, when you plant vegetables around the trunk of the vine, from where do we begin to measure the 16 ammas? Not from the external part of the vegetable, but from the center. And if you have vegetables all the way around the vine, which is the case of the Mishnah in diagram A, so the center of the circle doesn't even need to have vegetable in it. The center of the circle can have vine in it because you planted vegetables around the vine. If you count, if you configure a vineyard with the 4 amma interval, 4 amma interval is both between the vines on a single row and equally between every single row. If you see the picture, it's gavaldik. It's going to chop 3 rows from all sides. 3 rows. You'll see up 3 rows, to the sides 3 rows. It doesn't mean that it's going to grab the same amount of vines on each row. The furthermost rows will be 2 vines less. And I don't have to speak more than that. Just take a look at the picture. And if you don't have a picture, these details are not that important. But the mitzias, again, only when the vegetables are planted in middle, that means around the vine, when you start counting 16 ammas from the center of the vine, when everything is spaced 4 ammas, you will have exactly 45 vines that fall within the circle. Now, let's go to diagram B. Diagram B, just for the record, which is not the case of the Mishnah, is where it even looks more normal, more possible. A person, let's say, did not know the halachas, and they planted. Who plants around the vine? They found an empty spot, and in diagram B, it was where nothing is planted. It's a little nakuda that's equally distant from the 4 vines around it. If you start counting the radius from a vine that's not planted, from a vegetable that's not around the vine, but it's in between the vines, you will actually find that there will be 52 vines that will be included in the 16 amma radius. And the Mishnah will also say that. The Mishnah that's saying 45, that's the purpose of these pictures, is because the Mishnah is only speaking about a scenario where you begin to measure from a vine because you planted the vegetables around the vine. Okay, so let's leave it at that. Now says the Mishnah, let's now, Daf Nun, Amosai is the number. How do we get to 45? When do we say 45? And now you'll right away understand why the Mishnah doesn't give you the klal and make the cheshbon on your own. Because bisman shehem netuyos arba al arba oy chomesh al chomesh. Here we're learning another layer. The 45 physically isn't only because the vegetables were planted around a vine, which makes you count the 16 amas from the center of a given vine. It's only because they were 4 amma intervals. If you would have a kedem that was configured by 5 means same, all equal, 5 between each vine on every row and 5 between the rows, if you would do that, and take a look, again, if you have an art scroll 50A in diagram C, so in diagram C, if you go from the center, don't forget, guys, that the further apart the vines, then the less number, you'll have a lower number within the same radius. And in this configuration, if you make the cheshbon in your brain, or if you do the easier way, you just take a look at it, there's only going to be 37 vines within the rule of 16 amas. And that's the point of the Mishnah. The Mishnah wants to tell you, all of this is because of Marasayim. That since, that's what the Tosfos Yontiv says, that's the reason he gives. Since most people cannot discern when they look to see whether it's a 4x4 or 5x5. That's what Chazal said. I'm sure some people could. I'm sure someone like me right now, I don't know if I would know the difference between 4 and 6. Fine. But between 4 and 5 is where you have the halachic issue of people won't know whether it's 4 or 4 or 5. So what the Chazal did is, instead of just giving a hard and fast rule, 16 amma radius, and, put it in there, make your circle, and whatever is in there becomes Asr Bahana, right, Danny, if it grew another 1/200th or more. We don't do that. The Chazal spoke about the majority was 4x4. And then they added that even if it's 5x5, and using the klal should have only prohibited 37 vines, aside of the vegetables, 37 vines. We don't do that. We're Vaiter Machmir. Because of people, Marasayan, we say even if it's 5x5, we're going to prohibit 45 vines. The Nakuda. Now, guys, we got the whole daf today. That's the Mishnah. But we only go from 4 to 5. The moment it's more than 5, then we go back to the rule of 16 amma radius. So says the Mishnah. That if they were planted 6 between the vines, 6 between one vine and the other, yes, it's already dafnun amid base, or sheva. And I want you to take a look at both pictures before we go weiter. Look at the picture, diagram E. If you have a kedem, Kevin, you got the wrong page. Page 50B1. If you have a kedem that has 6 amma intervals, then the amount of vines that will be included in the radius of the circle from the center, 16 amas in all directions, will only be 21. B'metzias. That's 6x6. If you're going to have diagram F now, if you're going to have the sheva, by sheva, you're only going to have, it's amazing. I want to say amazing, Taka. Look at this. If you plant both 6 and 6 and 7 by 7, oh, that was Gavaldik. That's why, again, the Mishnah says that you will equally have 21 vines. Not like plug. Whoever's looking at the picture will see that. That on diagram E, the circle goes beyond the peripheral vines. It goes beyond it, but it doesn't go beyond it enough to include even the next row. When you have a 7x7 intervals, then the circle mamish borders the outer part of these 21, of the peripheral of the 21. No, so that's another nuance, right? Rabbeinu HaKadosh Dafka gave the example of 6, 6, 7, 7. But he's saying one thing. We don't say loy plug anymore. We only say, or marasayin, people will confuse. Not loy plug. Marasayin, people will think, if it only included 37, which is the mitzias of 5 amma intervals, then they might only prohibit 37 when it's a 4-4. So that's why the Mishnah begins. The rule is 45. We apply that rule of 45 even when it's 5-5. Once you go more than that, then you have to look at the mitzias. And it could be that the mitzias, even though there's a greater interval, it won't change anything. Like you have 6-6, 7-7. They both only include 21 vines. Very interesting. And let's read it inside. Hareza, back in the Mishnah. Hareza mekadesh sheish esrei amma l'chol ruach. And how the cheshbon, the radius, dafka radius, you looked at the picture already, so Rabbi wants to make it clear, agulois v'loy miruba'os, that it's the 16 ammas have to be measured as a circle, not as a square. In other words, don't say that you make a square whose sides are 16 ammas away from the vegetables. Such a square would include more than the number 45 when you have a 4x4, right? Remember, we learned all of that when we learned the Masechta Sukkah. If you remember clearly, the whole din of a sukkah, the minimum size, right, 7x7 tvachim, and then we had a circular sukkah v'chulei, right? We're speaking about a circle in a box, not a box in a circle. Box in a circle is smaller. A box outside, circle in a box, the circle occupies less space than the box. So we're machmir, but only at 16 amos to every side. Okay, again. So first of all, says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, 2 details. And that's important. Number one, Gemara Rabbi Yosi ben Chanina Amar, that who, when, again, Rabbi didn't say 16 amos. Rabbi said 45 vines. So he wants to make it clear, you only will have the 45 vines if you planted the vegetable in a place. He's not speaking about that the place has to be around the vine. That's not his point. His point is it has to be around the vine that has in each direction. Kevin, take away that picture because it's confusing to what we're learning. Put the other 2 pictures on the right, diagram G and diagram H. You have to have 3 rows on each side. What do I mean by 3 rows on each side? That look at diagram H, you'll understand what Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina is saying. If you planted the vegetables around the vine, but you did it in a location in the Kedem that you have 3 rows to the right, you have 3 rows to the north, 3 rows to the south, making the north the top. But when you go to the east, or if you're going to the right, begashmias, you ran out of rows because you planted it more towards the end of the Kedem. You don't say it has to be 45. It doesn't have to be 45. It has to be a 16 amma radius. We say 4 and 5, same thing. We get that. But only if you have those vines within the radius. That's his point. Rabbi Avin b'Shem Shmuel makes another point. That it has to be, and that we spoke this out in the Mishnah, that you planted vegetables, or you were mekayim the vegetables that somehow were planted there, however, that are all the way around the middle vine. What do I mean all the way around the middle vine? Because from where do you measure the 16 amos? That's another nekuda. You don't measure it from a side. You don't measure it from any specific place. You measure it from the center of the vegetable. Or if you planted a circle of vegetables, which would be the case of our Mishnah, because you're putting the vine in the center. When you planted a circle of vegetables around the vine, you begin measuring the 16 amos from the center of the circle of the vegetables. If you would plant vegetables on one side of the vine, then you will not end up with 45. It's going to be less. The rule will always be the same. Don't get nervous. The rule is 16 amma radius. The Gemara gives two clarifications that when will you find 45? Only if you have on all sides 3 rows. It's not that all 3 rows are going to be equal. It's not a box. It's a circle. If you take a look at, just a picture over here, a diagram G, again, you'll see that the top row has in it only 5 vines that become included, right? The outermost rows. Once you go closer in, if you go down from top to bottom, the top row, you only have 5. When you go down, you have 6. No, it's not about how many on each row, but you have 3 rows. If you were to plant the vegetables in diagram G, if you only plant the vegetables on the right side of that middle kedem, if you would start measuring it from there, lav dafka, would you chop the left one all the way at the corner? Lav dafka. Somewhere you wouldn't chop it anymore. As you can see, the circle is mamish touching many of the outermost ones. Mamish. So that's another important detail. Now says the Gemara, hey chavida, okay, shoiva. So he's giving you the case that you're looking at the whole time. Shoiva shurin and shoiva. I know we have this lesson many times already in Kalayim. We're speaking about you have a vineyard that has on each row 7, and you have 7 rows. So how many vines do you have a total? If you take a look at diagram I, he's giving you the smallest vineyard where it's shayach for you to chop 45. Now 7 by 7 means you're beginning with a vineyard that only has 49 vines to begin with. The picture to the left, diagram I. Same mehem arba gefonim la arba zavis akedem. You're going to take out the 4. You're going to take out the 4 because it's not a box. The Mishnah says it's a circle. It's the circle within the box. So what will you lose? You're going to lose 4. 4 minus 49 is 45. The shtaydu shama boim v'chamish gefanim, and hadoi detanin, and this is the Mishnah. Harei he mekadesh aboim v'chamish gefanim. Now, obviously, if the Mishnah would have a case where you have 8 vines on every row, 8 rows, or if you have 100 vines, it would be the same. What the Gemara means to say is that if you are beginning in a vineyard that you don't even have 7 by 7, you're never going to have 45. These are all different ways of the Gemara making it clear. The klal is 16 amma radius. And Rabbi didn't say it that way. He said 45. He said 45 because he's being machmer even when it's 5-5. That's the reason why he said it. But you got to make sure that you have vines within that circle. Now, the final detail that we'll learn in today's daf. Says the Gemara, going back to the Amos side, even all of the above, all of the conditions were met. Still, Bisman shina tuyois, right? Only arba al arba, oy chamesh al chamesh. Says the Gemara, Hada, this statement of the Mishnah can only work now, and that will be indeed a proof that no more than 45 will be usher to a statement that we learned above, to a statement that we had that Rab Zajac said. Rab Zajac Amar Shemaina chutz memakim kerasim. Now Rab Shemaina was referring to the Mishnah that we learned vis-a-vis how many amas max could you have between the rows and still have the rows connecting one to the other, which is a prerequisite lebeis hillel. Lebeis Shammai, you don't have to connect rows. Lebeis Shammai, you have a kedem as long as you have 5 vines on one single row. But we go like beis hillel. You have to have 2 rows at least. But when do you connect 2 rows? There is a max after which we said they're not connected. What was the max? So the Mishnah said it has to be under 8 amas, which means that if it's exactly 8 amas, then it's no longer connected. Rab Zajac clarified. When do we not connect them? Because it's 8 amas, if there is 8 amas excluding the trunk of the vine itself. If the 8 amas include the place of the trunk, or by the 3 rows, according to most Tanoim, you can have 16 amas. 16 amas only disconnects it if it's 16 amas of empty space that we learned above. If it's including the place of the trunks, it's still connected. These are the words. So he doesn't have to say more words, but take a picture speaks 1,000 words. Look inside the picture diagram J. If the 4 amas of our Mishnah, if when Mishnayos speak about the Shiyurim, if Rabbeinu HaKadosh is consistent, if he would have always meant including the trunks, there and here, if it would have been 4 amas including the trunks, then I want you to take a look and you'll see that I didn't count the number, but I know the rows. How many rows will be included in a radius of 16 amas? Not only 3, but 1 from the 4th, from all of the directions. So actually it would have been 49. And take a look at diagram J. So that's the number. You know, it's when you include the trunks, you're bringing them closer together. if they are closer together, more fit within the same radius. And take a look at the picture of Gavaldik. But he said 45. He didn't say 49. Only the max was 3 rows away from the Isser. 3 rows. Not any part of the 4th row. Why? Because the 4th row doesn't fit in it. Why not? Because the 4 amas that we are speaking about, the Rebbe said the words 4 by 4, is always excluding the trunks. And just like it has to be that way. If not, there'll be more than 45. And just like here is that ayah that above, when we learned about the 8 Amma. And Abzaeda says, yeah, the 8 Amma is excluding, it all fits together. Gavaldik. I know it's a bit early, but we'll leave it. Tomorrow's daf is also small. And that concludes today's daf nun. To be continued.
Can I ask you a quick question, Rabbi?
Sure.
Okay, this whole idea of including the trunks or not including the trunks,
Yeah.
not fully understanding what we're saying. Meaning, when you say not including the trunk, what does that mean? That we take the actual space that the trunk occupies and we kind of take that out of our calculation and we only count the space between the trunks?
Rebbe said that you have a 45 vines are prohibited when for the person who planted a vineyard by giving 4 amma interval. What Rebbe didn't specify is when you planted your kadam and you gave 4 ammas intervals, does that mean that you counted from the center of trunk of row 1 and the center of row 2 and you have 4 ammas? Or does it mean that the 4 ammas is only the empty space between the southern part of row A, the northern part of row 2, in between 4 ammas? And it's the latter. And not only here, because whenever we have measurements in the Mishnah, in Kalayim, it's always speaking about in between and not including.
So it's almost like we pretend that the trunks don't exist. Or like that they're not taking up. Meaning actually so that 16 ammas space is actually more than 16 ammas when you
100%,
think about it.
That's what we were saying.
If each trunk is, I don't know, 6 inches or whatever it is.
Let's say 1 amma, very good. Half and half, 100%. And let me go more than that. There is a logic to it. First of all, this is the proof. The logic is that where do we get the share of 4 am? 4 ammas is avoida. Why did the Chachamim call it avoida? Avoida is because when people work the vineyard, I know that the modern technology changes these shiurim only on a technical level. But technically, the types of instruments, whether it was the oxen or whether it was the wagons, the oxen for the plowing and the wagons for the harvest, they took up 4 ammas width. 4 ammas is 6 feet, and maybe that's how much. It makes a lot of sense. And when you have a vineyard, so when you have a small thing, you can pick it by hand. You can work it by hand. Once you have a kedem, you want to use instruments for you to be able to, work less and accomplish more, and in a lesser amount of time. You needed daladamas. The daladamas that you needed was in between the trunks for you to fit properly. If your car is 4 ammas wide and you want to drive through a vineyard, you have to have 4 ammas of empty space. So it makes sense that you need to leave all of the shiyurim are excluding.
Is there a maximum width? If it goes over a certain amount, you don't count it anymore? Let's say the width gets to be
that's what we
10.
learned in the Mishnah before, that if excluding the trunks, if you only have a 2 row, you left 8 ammas of empty space, excluding the trunk, then it's not a vineyard.
Right.
Why would people leave 8 ammas? They would okay, or